Before we get started, just a couple of reminders. For those of you that weren't able to attend our kind of college application overview and everything, we have already been in the classrooms with seniors. We put that presentation right in their Schoology page, so their senior Schoology page, counseling folder, post-high school planning, tons of information in there. The presentation is in there that we give them. All of these resources, we've made some really nice step-by-step guides that have screenshots right of their either Naviance account or Common App to walk them through. So as you guys are going through the process, that's a great first place to go when you're home and you don't have access to us in that moment and you have a question. Chances are the answer is somewhere in there. And of course, if you still need some help, send us emails, give us calls, have your students stop by and make an appointment. We just got started meeting with them one-on-one, so that's what's happening now. We're continuing to answer any of those questions they may have, making sure that they feel comfortable with what they should be doing right now in their checklist. So that's what's happening in the moment with us. After tonight, this is pretty much, as far as night events specific for our seniors, this wraps up that piece. We do have the post-high school planning workshop on November 16th, which really is a great presentation for all families. So if you have students who are grades 9 through 11, great opportunity to come. We're finally back in person. We have, I think, almost 20 different sessions to choose from. You'll have 3 different session times. So if you have a 9th grader, you can come all the way through and see something different each year. There are a few things that seniors may be interested in. There's some military stuff, there's some school to work if your child might not 100% go to the college path. We have some options like that. We have a couple of other like music auditions, art portfolios, some specific things. But a lot of you are probably right in the middle of this application process. So that is coming 5:30 on November 16th. And there was something else, what was the other? Just trying to make sure we remind you. Oh yes, and just be mindful of your deadlines. So early action, early decision deadlines, those are going to come quickly. We're already to October, so that is going to move fast as your students start these applications. If your student is interested in early action, early decision, watch those deadlines. And then even regular decision, because those deadlines are hard with the college. They will not bend on that. So you want to be mindful. We remind students 12 processing days for transcripts. It's right on the top of our transcript request form, and it's school days. So please don't come in the day before winter break and expect your transcript to be uploaded for that January 1 deadline. Okay, so those are just the things, if you from home can be on top of your students and make sure they're being mindful of that. So tonight we have with us Renee Swift. She's from Nazareth College, financial aid expert, because while we are here to help your children, financial aid is a monster that only the experts should really be sharing the information on. So I'm going to turn it over to her. We will be posting this presentation online. We did provide just like a note catcher if you're someone who likes to take notes. There's some, I think, still available in the back, but this will be available online. And we just asked that at the end, there's a QR code on that note catcher form, and we'll put it up here on the screen. If you can just provide us some feedback on the night, we'd appreciate it. So we'll talk about that at the end. But welcome to Renee.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back here. I think this is my 3rd or 4th year coming up here as far as it goes for me. So I'm glad to see all of you out here to learn a little bit or a lot of bit about financial aid this evening. Do we have to edit this? So the goals for tonight, one of the things that I like to share with families as you are beginning this process, or maybe it's been a little bit of time since you thought about financial aid, is I like to define some of the more common terms and words that we use, and it's mostly acronyms. So I like to share some of the more common ones with families so that when it comes time for you to start having those conversations with the financial aid offices, that you have more meaningful conversations with those representatives. So that's one of our first goals this evening. What forms are involved? What is financial aid? Because you might have your own ideas of what financial aid is, and then I will share with you what is most widely known about financial aid. How does the process work? What is need-based financial aid? You will hear that phrasing several times throughout this presentation this evening, and about midway through, you will hopefully have a better understanding of what that phrasing means. And if you walk away with nothing other than that tonight, that's going to be huge to know the difference between need-based and non-need-based financial aid. How can I avoid errors, and what kind of financing options are available? So those are our main goals for this evening. So this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of our acronyms and alphabet soup and multi-syllable words that we use and say on a regular basis. So I like to familiarize your families with these words, just again, so that you have a better understanding and that you can have more meaningful conversations with the financial aid offices. So the first one up there shouldn't be, hopefully, a foreign acronym to you, the Fafsa, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. That is the main financial aid form that colleges and universities use to help determine what types of federal aid you qualify for. So that would be federal grants, federal loans, and federal work study. Many colleges, Nazareth included, also use the FAFSA data for eligibility for the need-based grants. So there's that phrasing that I mentioned. The FSAID is a terrible name for what it is. It is a unique username and password for the student and at least one parent whose information is on the FAFSA, and that serves as their electronic signature. So when you go through the process, and I'm not sure if there are parents in the room that have already current college students or college students in the last couple of years, you already have your FSAID. And if you remember the process near the end of the setup of your FSAID, it spit out like a 6-digit number. A lot of people think that that's the FSAID, and it's not. That's just the final step to prove that you're not a robot. But the FSAID is just that unique username and password that we all have for many different platforms that we use in our daily lives. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on that later on in the presentation. SAR is the student aid report. And when your student submits their FAFSA, they will get an instant email that says the FAFSA has been submitted. But usually within 2 or 3 business days, they will get another email that says their FAFSA has been processed, and they can then view their student aid report, which is essentially their answer sheet. It's all the information that was data entered. So you have a chance to review it, check it over for any errors, make any adjustments. If you mistyped your phone number or whatever the case may be, you can make those adjustments. But if not, you can just file that away in your college filing system, whatever system works best for you. EFC stands for Expected Family Contribution, and I'm not going to get too detailed into that right now because I do have a whole slide dedicated to that when we start getting into that need calculation. MPN stands for Master Promissory Note, and this could be both applicable to the student and to the parent if they borrow any loans. So students are eligible to borrow loans through the gateway is the FAFSA. And there are a couple different steps that first-time loan borrowers have to complete, and one of them is the Master Promissory Note, which is a legal document that they're electronically signing with their FSAID that says that they're agreeing to pay the loan back under the terms and conditions of the loan. If a parent borrows, a parent would also be completing a Master Promissory Note. SAP is one of probably hundreds, if not close to thousands, of federal regulations that we have to follow. Our Federal Student Aid Handbook is about 1,500 pages long. It's in 2 binders, about yay thick, that live in our office, and those are all the rules and regulations that we have to follow as administrators of federal aid. This is one that I strongly encourage when you get there, like when your child has decided upon the school that they're going to be attending in the fall semester, that you become familiar with the satisfactory academic progress standards for federal financial aid, for state financial aid if they're attending in state, as well as institutional financial aid. And guess what? They're all different. So you have different standards for merit monies from the college, different standards for federal aid, and different standards for state aid. So I would encourage you, when the time comes, to become familiar with those standards. What it means in a nutshell is that your student is making progress toward a degree. Typically, a 2-year degree is going to take 2 years. A bachelor's degree is going to take 4 years. Sometimes there are some bumps along the way, and a student might take a little bit longer to complete the degree. But in theory, it would be 2 years or 4 years. And that the student is making progress. So they're not registering for, say, 15 credits and either withdrawing from or failing half of their course load each semester. That's not progress toward a degree. So a lot of schools will review this progress standard every semester. Nazareth reviews it every summer because we have a fair amount of our students attend in the summer, at the end of the fall, and at the end of the spring. Some schools opt to just do it annually. So you kind of want to familiarize yourself with what those minimum standards are so that you're not caught off guard if you were to receive a notice after a particular semester or a particular academic year and say, what's this all about? So I would just, again, strongly encourage you to become familiar with those renewal standards. SEOG stands for Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. So often you'll hear, counselors or financial aid professionals saying, apply early, apply as early as you can for financial aid. And one of the reasons why is there are, sometimes a pool of money that is given out on a first-come, first-served basis based on, maybe the Fafsa filing date. So SEOG is one of them. So that is a finite pool of money that is given out to colleges and universities to spend for our students who are Pell eligible. So that it's specific to a unique subset of students, and it's to be spent for those that are eligible. So students who are not Pell eligible would not qualify for this particular federal grant. So that's the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. The next three I'm going to kind of lump all together because they're loans, they're federal loans. The first two are students' loans, where a student, by filing the Fafsa, is having eligibility to borrow federal loans. The first one, the subsidized loan, the federal government defers or pays the interest on that loan while the student is enrolled at least half time, which is typically 6 credits or more. 6 is the magic number with federal loans. So I tell my students all the time, 6 is the magic number, just remember the number 6. As long as you're enrolled in at least 6, you're eligible, and if you continue to be enrolled in 6, you will have your loans deferred while you're in school. So if you go below 6, that's when you're not eligible for the loans, and then could be using some of your grace period, like right before repayment. So 6 is just the magic number that I tell students to remember. So the subsidized loan is a need-based loan. So there's that phrasing again. The federal government does defer the interest on that loan while the student is enrolled at least half time. The unsubsidized loan is everything the opposite. It's a non-need-based loan, so everybody that files a Fafsa, regardless of their income, is eligible for the unsubsidized loan. And the interest is not deferred by the federal government. So that's a non-need-based loan, no deferral of interest. The PLUS loan stands for the Parent Loan for Undergraduate Students, and this is essentially an unsubsidized loan as well, and this will accrue interest until it is repaid. But this is where a parent can borrow in their own name to help with the remaining costs not covered by the student's financial aid. So there is an option, a federal option for parents to borrow on, to help with those college expenses. Again, it's in the parent's name. It will never be in the student's name. The parent can't transfer it into the student's name. It is in the parent name only. So as I mentioned earlier, the Fafsa is the gateway to access those 3 loan types. TAP is a tuition assistance program. It's within New York State. So if your students are considering attending college within New York State, in addition to filing the Fafsa every year, your student would also be completing the New York State TAP application every year. Ideally, that would be done in one sitting. So you start with the Fafsa, you list at least one New York State school on the Fafsa, and you will be prompted at the end when you hit submit to complete the state application. It doesn't say New York State application, it just says state application, because New York State is not the only state with state grant programs. So you want to make sure that you try to the best of your ability to do it all in one sitting. If you happen to not, you will still have an opportunity to complete the TAP later on. When I mentioned earlier about getting that email that says the Fafsa has been processed, it's usually a couple, 3 days after they've submitted it, that would be your prompt to go out to the New York State site and get that TAP application completed. And one other thing with New York State TAP is it's not portable. So it's only for use within New York State to 2-year, 4-year public-private schools within New York State. And finally, the DRT stands for the Data Retrieval Tool. And that's a very powerful, wonderful tool that's built into the Fafsa, where rather than you trying to spread out your 30-page tax return and trying to figure out what lines you need to put on, or wondering, geez, it tells me I'm looking on this line and I'm not sure, this tool will just transfer all the information directly into your Fafsa. So the majority of the income information that is needed in the parental income section and the student income section is transferred in from the IRS data retrieval tool. So there are a few things that you have to data enter, possibly from your W-2s, or if it's a 2-parent household filing a married filing jointly tax return, you would have to individually key in your respective incomes, because the data retrieval tool is not smart enough yet to discern of the $125,000 of adjusted gross income, how much is for the first parent, how much is for the second parent. So you would have to have your W-2s handy to be able to data enter that information. So that is just a brief introduction to what we live and breathe every single day. What forms am I going to need? So we've kind of talked about the Fafsa. That is the main form for federal aid and possibly institutional aid, depending on the institution. It's pretty narrow in the information it collects. It's got about 107-ish questions. And it's pretty narrow in the information it collects. It wants to know income information, asset information for both the student and the parent. It wants to know the household size, the number in college, and a variety of other things of what year the student is, what degree they're working on. Of the 106 or 7 questions, the majority of them are about the student. So about 75% of the questions are about the student directly. So when you're in the Fafsa, you want to make sure you'll see the little ribbon in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, and it'll say student information, student information, student information. So then you know, okay, I'm answering these questions about my student. Because a lot of times when parents are driving the Fafsa bus, they forget that they're answering questions about the student, and they flip and they start answering the questions about themselves. So that can create some issues down the road depending on how those questions are answered. So I would just kind of remember, just keep watching those little banners on each screen to make sure, or to remind you, okay, it's still student, it's still student. And when it switches to parent, you're like, oh, there's my section. So it's about 25% are parental questions. The Css Profile is another form that some colleges require, and that is going to be more of your large colleges that have large endowed funds to spend, their own endowed funds to spend. So they want to make sure that they're spending these funds adequately and to the students who are, demonstrating the most need for them. So the Fafsa, with its narrow scope, the Css Profile is a little less narrow. And it's got a lot more questions on it. I always deem it the Fafsa on steroids because it's so many more questions. They want to know if there's a divorce separation situation. They want information about the custodial parent. The Fafsa doesn't. They want to know values of your home. They want to know a lot of information about you. So you'll have to have a lot more information at hand when you are completing the Css Profile. And that should be very clearly marked on the admissions and or financial aid websites of the schools that your kids are looking at to have it very clear, we require the Fafsa and the Css Profile. The only school locally that requires it is the U of R. So if your kids are going anywhere other than the U of R locally, the Fafsa and TAP applications will be the only 2 forms that you would need. New York State TAP, we've kind of covered that too. That's a separate application in addition to the Fafsa or the Css Profile to have access to state funds. So you think of Fafsa federal, CSS is institutional, New York State TAP is for New York State. So where does the money, what is financial aid? I'm getting ahead of myself. So what is financial aid? We lump it pretty much in 2 main categories. The first category is called gift aid, or as our students call it, free money. It's money that students don't have to pay back, and it's in the forms of scholarships and grants. So scholarships don't require the Fafsa as part of the process. My experience has been that merit reviews, whether that's strictly merit or possibly even talent reviews, are automatic. The merit review happens kind of in concert with the admissions office and the financial aid office. If there is, say, a studio art or performance kind of situation going on, then you would arrange either a portfolio submission or an audition with the college for some talent-related scholarships. We have that at Nazareth. We have students who come in and are evaluated by faculty for auditions and also art portfolio reviews. So there's scholarships that are attached to both. And that should be pretty readily available on the financial aid websites too, or even cross-reference with the admissions websites of the schools that your kids are looking at. So scholarships, again, is an automatic review in most cases, but you would want to, if it were me with a college student, I would want to like make sure of that, of the schools that my kids were looking at, just to make sure that I didn't miss like a separate application. But again, based on my experience, it's an automatic review. There's nothing additional that you would need to do. Grants, on the other hand, are need-based, that phrasing again, and would require the Fafsa, and we've talked about that already. The second category is called self-help, and this is where student loans and parent loans would come into play. Loans are borrowed by either the student and or the parent. They need to be paid back once the student is done with school. No payments are required while they're in school, at least half time, which is 6 credits or more. That's that number 6 again. I would feel very confident. Let's fast forward a couple, 3 months. When you start receiving the financial aid offer letters from the schools that your students have been accepted to and that they've listed on their Fafsa, I will feel very confident standing here on October 5th, 2022, 6 o'clock in the evening, that your financial aid offer letter is going to have a little bit of institutional money on it, a little bit of federal money on it, and a little bit of state money on it, and part of those federal dollars are going to be loans. So when you start getting those offers, it's very important to just distill them as best you can. They should be very clearly marked. This is a scholarship. This is a grant. This is a loan. So often that is kind of overlooked when reviewing the financial aid offers, and when you get deeper and deeper into the process, and the bills come out, and then you see, okay, my bill is, we'll say $5,000. You pay the $5,000, but then families somehow realize, well, there was a loan part of that. I didn't know that that was a loan. Well, it was direct subsidized loan, direct unsubsidized loan was listed as part of the offer letter, and we are what's called a passive accept school at Nazareth, meaning that we assume that you want the financial aid we've offered to you unless you tell us differently. Some schools are active accept schools, meaning that a student would have to actively click a button or sign something electronically and send it back to the school to formally accept the financial aid. So we just encourage you to read them over carefully so that you're understanding what is comprising that financial aid offer. Because like I said, I would feel very confident this evening saying that loans, if you file a Fafsa, loans will be part of your financial aid offer, and you're under no obligation to borrow. They're great resources for families to help pay educational costs, but you're under no obligation to borrow. Employment is also part of self-help, where students who file a Fafsa could be eligible for federal work study. That's a need-based work opportunity, or just campus employment. And the major difference between the two is, again, off of the Fafsa, if the student files a Fafsa and has demonstrated financial need, then they would qualify for work study. But if not, they would still be able to work on campus. It's just who's paying the student. Are they being paid out of federal dollars, or are they being paid out of a department's budget? It's the same work experience, it's the same rate of pay, it's just, again, who's paying the student. And it's we encourage work study or working on campus. It's just a great way to become involved. The example that I tend to use is if your student is on the shyer, maybe non-athletic, less social side, but they have always had a history of working and they want to continue that at college, and that's just a great opportunity for them to become connected to the campus as a student worker, and just being involved with the inner workings of a college campus office. And at Nazareth, we probably have between 700 and 800 work study students, or campus student workers. Our admissions team has a lot of student workers. They are tour guides and ambassadors. And then many offices across campus utilize student employment. So again, it's just a great way to become involved. So where does the money come from? We've kind of touched on this already. the federal government is your biggest resource with the Fafsa. So the Fafsa is the gateway to the majority of the financial aid, federal financial aid that your students are going to be eligible for. And then New York State has probably one of, if not the most robust state grant programs in the country. So that is very important to make sure that you are completing not only the FAFSA for federal aid, but the New York State TAP application for access to New York State aid. Your colleges and universities are going to be your other resource for the merit-based scholarships and the need-based grants. And then your private organizations for outside scholarships. So I would suggest seniors to start this process now and kind of don't stop, because you're not only financing 1 year, you could be financing possibly 2 up to 4 years of your college expenses. And you know, you want to try to treat it like a part-time job, you know, apply to 1 or 2 scholarships a week. Reach out to the counselors to see if they've got any local scholarships you can apply to. I do have a link at the end of the presentation that will be shared with you for the Rochester Community Foundation, which is another really good local resource. Your parents' jobs might have some scholarship or tuition assistance. Students, you might have a part-time job that has some scholarship or tuition assistance. Churches, your local philanthropic organizations, Rotary, Kiwanis, those type of things. You know, don't leave any stone unturned. You know, you want to make sure that you're maximizing all of the financial aid that's out there for you. And if you haven't started looking at, you know, physically going to campus for some college tours, I would encourage you to do virtual tours of the financial aid office websites, because you're going to get a list of free, reputable search engines for outside scholarships. And you know, I think you're going to get out of it what you put into it. If you're kind of like, well, you know, I might do this and this, you know, you're not going to be casting a really wide net. But if you, again, treat it like a part-time job and just, you know, apply to 1 or 2 a week, I would like to think that something is going to shake out of that tree for you to, again, maximize your free money opportunities. We're seeing more and more students coming in with 5, 6, 7 different outside scholarships, which can either replace their loan money that they were expecting to borrow or reduce their loan borrowing. So, you know, with being conscious of loan debt and, you know, wanting to be mindful of that, you know, this is just another way of reducing that in hopefully in the long run. Other ways of creatively kind of financing your education is looking for, once you're, you know, established on campus, looking for opportunities possibly to be a resident assistant if you're living on campus, and that would be where you kind of are a leader among some residential students, and in exchange for that you get reduced housing and meal plan. So that is one of the great perks of being that leader on campus. At Nazareth, a first-year RA gets their room paid for and half of their meal plan, and if they are hired again for a future year, they get full room and board covered. So it's just, again, it's another resource available. Just something to think about if that's something that you think your student would be good at. Maybe starting those conversations. But it's just a great, not only way to become a leader on campus, but it's also got a great financial benefit to it. So private organizations for outside scholarships, again, looking at the financial aid office websites for those free reputable search engine links, and get that process started now, if you haven't already. So now we're going to get into that need calculation that I've been promising. And the first part of the arithmetic, and it's just basic subtraction. It starts with the cost of attendance. We also call it the budget. And the elements that you see on the screen are required. It's required by the federal government that these elements be part of the cost of attendance. We don't decide, oh yeah, we're going to have tuition but not fees and board but not room. It's not our choice. That 1,500 pages that I was telling you earlier, that's in there. So most of our incoming first-year students are directly billed tuition and fees and room and board. But even say, for example, you have your own off-campus apartment or you're living at home with mom and dad, there is still a room and board component built into your cost of attendance. So those items are there. And then the indirect charges, your estimated charges, are going to be for books and supplies, travel, and personal expenses. So those are kind of like an average, and that's across the board for all students. And then all of those items together is what it would cost to attend college for 1 year. And that's without any financial aid, that's without anything adjusting that. So that's gonna be, for some schools it's gonna be $25,000 for a cost of attendance. Some other schools maybe $45,000. So that is the total what it would cost to attend college for 1 year. Then we deduct that family contribution that was part of our alphabet soup earlier. So the expected family contribution also is a complex formula behind the scenes of the FAFSA, where you're data entering all that information, the income information, asset information, and it's going to spit out that family contribution at the very end. I can't tell you not to freak out when you see it, because the number is going to range from 0 all the way up to $999,999, and you will be on that linear spectrum somewhere. We use it as a tool. It's a tool to determine what type of financial aid your student qualifies for. So it usually ends up being a source of angst, and I'm hopefully that when you get there and hit submit on the FAFSA and you see your family contribution, that you're not like, oh my gosh, what am I gonna do? Again, it's just a tool that we use to help determine certain types of eligibility for federal aid, or for need-based aid specifically. So it's prescribed by law. We have nothing to do, it's nothing anything Nazareth does, it's nothing MCC does. It's just, the elements are there and it gets sent through this algorithm behind the scenes, and then it spits out this family contribution. And what it is meant to mean is that that's what the federal government reasonably expects the family, the student included, to provide financially towards educational costs. So again, it's just a tool that we use. So what I've listed here on the slide are just the main data elements from the FAFSA that go into that calculation. So there might be some parents in the room that have older college students that went to college maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and if you remember back then filing the FAFSA was available in January, and you had to use the most recent tax year, which we hadn't done yet because it wasn't due, the FAFSA was out in January, but your taxes weren't due till April. And then you had to go in and estimate based on your W-2s or based on your last pay stub from the prior year, and then had to remember to go back into the FAFSA after you filed your taxes and update all the information. Well, that went out the window about 4 years ago, where the federal government pushed back the FAFSA to be available in October, and rather than it being the most recent tax year, they went back 2 years. So that's why it says prior year up there, or another acronym for you, PPY. So 2 years is a long time, it's a long period of time for income tax filing and FAFSA filing. So I have a slide in a few minutes that will go into a little bit more detail about what happens if the base tax year filing is not really representative of what the current family finances are. So we want you to complete the FAFSA with the correct base year information for the 23-24 cycle, which is just opened a few days ago, is the 2021 tax year. So the prior year of the parent and the student income, then they want the current value of any parental or student assets. They want the number in the number in the household. So the household, I usually pause here and also describe for the parental piece of the household, that if the natural or adoptive parents are married to each other and live together, then they are included in the household and their information is on the FAFSA. If the natural or adoptive parents are not married to each other but live together, then they are both in the household and both of their information is on the FAFSA. If it's a divorce separation situation and the student lives primarily with mom and mom has not remarried, then it's only mom in the household and on the FAFSA. And conversely with dad, if the student lives with dad primarily, then dad is on the FAFSA and in the household. Going back to mom, if she has remarried at the time of the FAFSA filing, then it's mom and step-parent in the household and on the FAFSA. And dad, if he has remarried at the time of the FAFSA filing, then it's dad and step-parent on the FAFSA and in the household. If neither, or if none of those scenarios apply to your parental situation, then you want to have a conversation with the financial aid office so that we can ask you a few more questions about what your family looks like, so that we can help you get the FAFSA completed accordingly and collect the appropriate documentation from you. Because there's some cases where, a student is not living with either parent, they might be living with a relative or someone else that's not their parent, and it's just a whole conversation of how best to answer the questions on the FAFSA. So the household members, and then the number in college. So going back to the household size. So that's going to include the parents, however that situation is, the student, any siblings, and any other folks in the household that the parents are supporting more than 50%. So that could be, you might have grandma and grandpa living with you, or you might have an aunt or an uncle living with you. So you want to make sure that you're including everyone in that household size number. Then the number in college is going to be the student, and any siblings that might be in college at the same time. If there are parents in the room that are, or that will be watching later, if you are also in college and taking advantage of federal and state aid programs, you can include, the parent can include their student in their number in college, but the student can include the parent in the number in college. You can't have it both ways. So I don't know how applicable that's been over the course of my time doing these presentations, but I try to make that clear to families too. And the calculation also takes into consideration the age of the older parent to shelter a little bit more of their income for the parent that's closer to retirement. So let me back up just to review. So we start with our cost of attendance, and then we're going to deduct the family contribution. And that arithmetic, if there is a positive number left over after that arithmetic, then the student has demonstrated financial need, meaning that they would qualify for need-based financial aid. So on the federal side, that's going to be the federal subsidized loan, that's going to be the federal work study, and possibly even need-based grants within the college. If that number is 0 or negative, it doesn't mean that your student is completely cut off from financial aid, it just means that they're only eligible for non-need-based aid. So that would be your unsubsidized loan and campus employment if they wanted to work on campus. With the FAFSA, you can list up to 10 schools to receive your students' information. So you can data enter the federal school codes. Each school has a six-digit code that's specifically for them. And if your student is accepted to all 10 of those schools, they will receive financial aid offers from all 10. What you'll notice is that family contribution is going to be the same for all 10 schools. But what's going to be different is the cost of attendance. So as I mentioned, those data elements are required. But each college is a different college type. It's public, it's private, it's 2-year. So those costs are going to be different across the different school types. And that's what this slide is meant to represent, that you'll see the family contribution is the same, but the level of unmet need fluctuates with going from a 2-year to a 4-year state, and then a 4-year private. So you're going to see some fluctuation in the diversity of the types of awards, and also the dollar amounts. So we try to demonstrate to the best of our ability that if you're even thinking, I don't think we can afford a private school, or even possibly even a SUNY school, have those be part of the conversation. Put them on the table, because I think you'll be pleasantly surprised of the generosity of the financial aid offers that you'll receive. I've worked at a private school for the last 11 years, and when I first started, I was like, there's no way. And I started seeing some of the financial aid offers, and I was just blown away by some of the generosity of them. So if you're kind of on the fence with it, put 1 or 2 on the FAFSA, you never know. I mean, you're under no obligation to sign on the dotted line for them. It would be, to have all of the options open, and then weighing all of your options, and then making a good enrollment decision when it comes time. So the FAFSA for our seniors is available now. It opened on October 1st. So anytime between now and, if there's any priority filing date with the school or schools that your kids are looking at, you want to make sure that you're getting the FAFSA in appropriately. And one word of caution on the studentaid.gov website is that there are 2 FAFSAs out there right now. There's one FAFSA is for the 22-23 cycle, which is for our current college students who are enrolled right now, the fall semester, or students who plan to be enrolled in the spring semester. So the FAFSA that you want to complete is the 23-24 FAFSA. So you just want to make sure that you're grabbing the right one. And October 1st, you want to calendar that every year because you're going to be doing the FAFSA and TAP applications every single year that your student is an undergrad student. There is graduate study financial aid at the federal level in the form of federal loans. So every year that your student is wanting access to federal aid, they want to do the FAFSA. So this is the landing page for studentaid.gov and just getting signed in there. It's a very powerful, useful website. I'm not sure if you can appreciate on the slide, but right above the word FAFSA in the dark blue, there is 4 main library items. And it kind of takes you from the phase that you're in now, the learning phase, about different aid programs. And as you go to the right, it's getting you to graduation and repayment of any loans that you would borrow. So under the Understand Aid, you're gonna learn about what's the difference between a grant and a loan, what different federal aid programs out there. So if tonight's presentation wasn't enough for you and you want more, this is the site you want to go to. So Understanding Aid is going to be just that. It's going to be helping you better understand federal aid programs. Apply for Aid is one of the sections you're going to be doing for your FAFSA and other financial aid related processes down the road. And then completing the aid process, that's where the family, the parent will be doing the parent loan application. So some of the things that happen with your student's financial aid are kind of automatic. So if, when your student files the FAFSA and the TAP applications, we get that information and we set up the financial aid award. And then that gets emailed or mailed to you and you take a look at it. But if a parent wants to do, say, a parent loan, that's not always included in the financial aid offer because we're not going to assume that you are going to borrow. You might have other plans for paying the remaining balance. Some schools do include the parent loan as part of the financial aid offer. So again, you just want to make sure that you're looking over those offers very carefully and then going through the different parts of the studentaid.gov website to get those other steps completed because, like I said, the parent loan is not automatic in some cases. The parent would actually have to actively go out to the website and do the application for the loan and then the corresponding promissory note. And this is also where the student would be doing their loan documents. So there's 2 loan documents that are required for first-time loan borrowers. One is called entrance counseling, and the other is their master promissory note. And those only have to be done once. So that will be good for 10 years. Both of those items will be good for 10 years. Parents, on the other hand, if they will continue to borrow through the parent loan program every year, that is a new application every year. That promissory note will be good for 10 years, but the application needs to be redone and renewed every year. So that's the landing page there for the FAFSA. And I created this chart because when the FAFSA moved from January to October, that was a huge shift for us. It was a huge shift in our process, it was a huge shift in our messaging, it was a huge shift in our timing of things. So that was a huge, huge thing for us. So then it was, just trying to keep track of, okay, October 1st, all right, and then keeping track of what cycle we were in and what base year tax information we were going to use. So what I've kind of trained my brain to do is to look at the first year of the FAFSA cycle, so 23, 24, all the way down to 28. Deduct 2 off of that, and if you pop over to the right-hand side of the chart, you'll see the base tax information that's needed. So, like I said, for the 23-24 cycle, we need the 2021 federal tax return, and then also the New York State tax return for 2021 for 1 question on the TAP application. So I think this goes down to 7th grade, so if you've got younger students in the pipeline, you can just either remember that October 1st of senior year is when we do it, and then every October 1st after that. So the FSA ID, as we were talking about earlier with our acronyms and things, is the student and parent electronic signature. It takes about 5 to 7 minutes to set up. One word of caution, well, a few words of caution with setting up the FSA ID is to make sure that your student's social, date of birth, and name as it appears on their social security card is correct. Of all the 107 questions on the FAFSA, those 3 need to be correct, because if not, behind the scenes, there's a lot of data matching going on, and if one of those elements is off, it would just create delays down the road. So you want to make sure, again, that kind of goes with the parents driving the FAFSA bus, Parents sometimes drive the FSA ID bus, which is fine, but it's just remembering, I'm doing this for my child, it's not for me, it's not for me, it's not for me, and just kind of remembering that you're setting it up for them and making sure that the information is correct. It's very similar to any other platform that you would use to set up a username and password for, putting in those identifiers, your address, your mobile phone, because that's a great resource to maybe reset passwords and things if that comes to pass later on. It's got the challenge questions that we all love, but again, it takes about 5 to 7 minutes to set up, and I would encourage you to do that before you sit down to do the Fafsa, because sometimes the FSA ID needs to kind of travel in those matches behind the scenes, and it might take anywhere from 1 to 3 days for the FSA ID to be actually finalized. So if that's something that you want to get done in the next couple of days, let that cook them up a little bit and then go out and do the Fafsa. Parents in the room or that will be listening at a later point, if you have current college students, and you already have an FSA ID as the parent that was on those Fafsas, so you don't have to set up a new one. If you have multiple students that are kind of like in line to go to college, or you've got one in college now and then some coming down the pike, you as the parent do not have to set up a separate FSA ID for each of the students. The students need their own FSA ID, but the parent doesn't need a unique one for themselves for each student. I hope that makes sense. So parents that have current college students, you already have an FSA ID if you filed a Fafsa. But then your new upcoming college student will need their own FSA ID. And throughout the setup of throughout the application for the FSA ID and the challenge questions and where you're typing passwords and things, it does have an opportunity to show the text. And I would encourage you to do that, because it'll ask you a question. What was your favorite toy as a child? And you write Play-Doh, and you don't remember if you did it in capital letters, small letters, or a combination of the two. So you want to make sure that you're showing the text, taking a screenshot of that, saving that in your college file, or taking the photograph of it with your phone. The challenge questions are utilized most often for password recovery. And if you're like me, you're only going to be accessing this once a year for the most part, and you probably got 25 passwords that you recycle. And when you're only accessing something once a year, you're going to possibly forget what that password is. So the challenge questions, like other platforms, are used for password recovery. Or just write it down and write down, this is the question I chose, this is the answer that I wrote, and make sure that you're writing it down. Making sure your big C is a big C, and not like little and it matches everything that you wrote in. So I would encourage you to just do that show text, which you make sure that you're getting down the answer that you put in. Merit scholarships, we've kind of talked about this as far as the selection criteria. You want to make sure that you're understanding the renewability, and that kind of goes back to that academic progress that we were talking about earlier. For example, at Nazareth, we have a tiering system of our merit scholarships, and each one has its own minimum GPA requirement that it would need to have the student maintain. We also require that students are full-time, which is 12 credits or more in the fall and spring semester. So they can only receive our merit money in the fall and spring semester. So that information should hopefully be readily available on that academic progress or renewable, how financial aid is renewed from year to year depending on the financial aid type. So it kind of just goes back to what we were talking about earlier. So this slide here, I've kind of touched on it a little bit earlier when I was saying about the different questions on the Fafsa are pretty narrow in the scope of what they're collecting. And that 2-year look back, 2 years is a really long time. And some days it doesn't feel like it's a long time, but it really is a long time. So that might be a difference between the tax filing in 1 year, one base year, compared to the current family finances is vastly different. And that usually it could be as a result of a loss or layoff of jobs that you went from making a really good salary to not making a really great salary, or there might have been an illness that has prevented you from working that is making a difference between what you earned 2 years ago versus now. It could be a change in the family, the family dynamic. It would be a divorce separation situation. A number of things. I've only put the more common ones that we see on the slide here, but I talk about this to emphasize that yes, the FAFSA is narrow in the information it collects. It doesn't give you an opportunity to write out a narrative to say, yes, in 2021, or whatever the base year is, yes, it looks like things are great, but in reality, this is what's happening. I'm not currently working, I'm on, disability, or, we've had an illness and not able to work full-time, or whatever the case may be. It's usually income related. But I want to emphasize that in cases such as these, and others that aren't listed there, the FAFSA isn't the final answer. That you can have a conversation with the financial aid office to say, hey, this is what's happening. And we might gently ask some probing questions. We're not asking them to be nosy. We're asking to get a better sense of the situation, and also to counsel you on what documents you would need to submit to us. Because we are audited every year by the Fed. As stewards of federal dollars, we have to responsibly award those dollars. And the Fed, during audit time, loves to pull files that we have done these kind of reviews on. So they want to make sure that they are following our logic along the way, and seeing the documentation that we had collected, and hopefully come to the same conclusion that we came to. The ultimate end game with this process is to get your student more money. So I hope none of this ever happens to you, but I want to just impress upon you that if it does, or if it's kind of maybe going on right now, that you have an avenue of a conversation with the financial aid offices to kind of get you through that process. As I said, you can list up to 10 schools on the FAFSA. You can opt to have this conversation with all 10 schools, or if you want to, because it is a labor-intensive process for the most part. We collect some documentation, and that varies because each situation is different. So sometimes it's collecting, 2 years worth of tax returns, W-2s, and all of that. But it's individualized because each situation is different. Then we kind of collect that information and kind of reconstruct what the current family income is, and then we go onto the FAFSA and make those adjustments, like I said, in the end game of getting your student additional monies. Sometimes the conversation with the financial aid office is like, even if we did make these changes, it's not going to really impact their ability to get additional federal dollars. And in that case, I would hope that the school would entertain another avenue for an appeal for additional monies, that it's not going to get you additional federal dollars, but it could get you additional institutional dollars. So, appeal can look at a couple of different ways. This is more of a adjustment of the FAFSA elements, the FAFSA data elements, but sometimes, families are just looking for additional support, and they would do a written appeal with the financial aid office of the schools that you're looking at. But again, I try to spend a little bit of time on this slide to just, again, emphasize that the FAFSA in some cases is not the final answer. And, it may seem like an invasive process, but if the end game is to get your student additional monies, that would be possibly a small sacrifice to get your child additional financial aid support. So errors, as I said, the social, the date of birth, and name on the social security card are the most important things. They're critical to getting the FAFSA going through all of its behind-the-scenes checks, because if something is kind of off, then that could require additional information to be sent to the financial aid office to resolve the error, or in some cases of in the cases of an incorrect social security number on the FAFSA, you would have to do it all over again. So I would like to save you the stress of an already stressful situation. Is just making sure that the social is correct. We talked about, who is my parent and the parental kind of options. And again, if none of those apply in your situation, you would want to reach out to the financial aid office to have a conversation of how best to answer those questions. Avoid leaving items blank. If it's 0, just type in a 0. I'm a more is more kind of thing, that if you're going through it and this is not, if the answer is 0, a lot of them pre-fill in as 0s, and if they're 0s, just leave them that way. But if they're not, just back out the 0 and put in the whole dollar amount. But it just, I would rather have no unanswered questions on the FAFSA so that, again, it doesn't delay processing down the road. Don't enter any commas or periods for like adding cents. Just like your tax return, the FAFSA is only dealing in whole numbers. And for students, we see this a lot when students are setting up their FSA ID and also filing their FAFSA. I think they're just so used to using their school address, their school email address, that they use it for these items too. But once you're graduated next year, you won't have access to that anymore. So we encourage you to do Gmail, Outlook or whatever, just so that you don't miss any renewal notices, because the primary way that the Fed is going to reach out to you is through email. And the primary way we are going to reach out to you is also through email. So we want to make sure that it's an email that you're checking regularly and that you have access to. Because so often, you'll do the, .edu or whatever that you have as a high school student, and then you won't have access to that after you graduate. So the IRS data retrieval tool we mentioned in our one of our opening slides with the alphabet soup, and this is just built into the FAFSA. It's not mandatory, but it is really a good tool to just know that you have the right information in the FAFSA. It cuts down on data entry errors, and it also could potentially facilitate other processes down the road. About 16 to 18% of FAFSA filers are chosen for a process called verification. And it's just a quality control process that the Fed does randomly. And it requires us, the financial aid offices, to collect additional information from you. And if you've done the data retrieval tool, that takes care of 1, possibly 2 additional pieces of information you'd have to send into the office. So the data retrieval tool is for both the student, if they file a tax return, and for the parent, if they file a tax return. There are rare cases where parents are not eligible to do the data retrieval tool, and that would be in a case where at the day of a FAFSA filing, they're divorce separated, but 2 years ago they filed a married filing jointly tax return. So if they have a married marital status, or a married filing jointly tax return and a divorce separated marital status, those things are in conflict with each other. Even though they're accurate, they're in conflict with each other. So the Fed will not allow you to do the data retrieval tool. So you would have to kind of knuckle that information in yourself. But there's only a handful of cases where a student or a parent would not be eligible to do the data retrieval tool. But it really is a valuable piece of the FAFSA to, again, just cut down on those data entry errors. One piece of advice that I would give you if you're using the data retrieval tool is making sure that you've got your tax return handy when you're doing it, because you're going to temporarily leave the FAFSA website and go out to the IRS website. And it'll pre-fill in some information for you, but it's also going to ask you to data enter your address as it appeared on your tax return. And if you spelled out the word street, you want to make sure you're spelling out the word street in the IRS website. Or if you abbreviated it, you want to make sure you abbreviate it, because if you do abbreviation and spell out, you're going to get an error that says, we are unable to locate your tax return. And you're going to say to yourself, oh, I'm looking at it. You have my tax return. You've got to make sure that the address matches exactly how it is on your tax return. That's usually a big source of anxiety, is when they can't get that to work, and it's usually because the addresses aren't matching. So other financing options, we've kind of talked about the unsubsidized loan and the parent loan that are available. The unsubsidized loan is available to students, the parent loan is available to parents to help with educational costs. A lot of colleges offer payment plans each semester, so rather than coming up with that lump sum payment that would be due each semester, you can enroll in one of their payment plans to split that out over 3, 4, 5 payments each semester, and that's sometimes a little bit more palatable than writing out a lump sum payment each semester. IRS 529 plans, if you've started a savings plan for your student when they were quite small, and that is now available to use, that's another resource, that you can expend that in the first couple of years so that you don't necessarily have to go the loan borrowing route until the student is an upperclassman. Military resources, we have some veteran families who pass along their military benefits to their students. The outside scholarships again, to get that started now and just kind of keep going with it. And my plug for summer employment. You know, we see so many of our students that come in with no money for their books, and they will either increase their loan, whether that's their parent loan or private loan that they borrow, to help them create a refund on their bill to help them with books. So we encourage students at the very least in the summertime to work and earn enough to pay for your books and supplies. So you know, you can still have fun over the summer, but you know, if you could just earn enough to pay for your books and supplies for each academic year. So because we want you to be successful, and the way to do that is to start successful with the resources for the books. And here's some resources for you as far as our website. We have some scholarship search engines on our website. New York State's website is through an agency called HESC. That is another acronym for you. It's the Higher Education Services Corporation, and they are the administrator of, you know, among other things, the New York State TAP program. Finaid.org is another really good resource about financial aid, and you know, you can tool around there and learn a little bit more if you wanted to have some more learning beyond this evening. The Rochester Community Foundation Scholarship that I was telling you about, they probably won't have the new applications available until, I don't know, later this year, early next year for the 23-24 cycle. And then studentaid.gov is the main stop for everything related to federal aid programs. So that's the application for the Fafsa, and as I mentioned, the other loan-related items for both the student and the parent, if that's applicable to you guys. And there's my contact information, my direct phone number and my email address, so should you have questions after you've had a chance to kind of have all this information wash over you. It's a lot of information thrown at you in a very short period of time, and there's no fun way that I'm aware of to present this information. I might have to work on that, strengthen my roadshow a little bit to maybe do a song and dance about it or something, I don't know. But it's a lot of information to distill in terms of what is the most important thing that we want you to know from our perspective. And I think just getting through the applications, doing them correctly, you know, just orienting you to some of the wording on the financial aid offer letters when you get them, I think that is valuable. So if you didn't find it valuable, hopefully that will be in your evaluation. We can tweak this for future presentations. But I have time for some questions if you've got some burning questions that you would want to address this evening too. Yes? Mm-hmm. And I think they're going to be posting these slides for you too, so if you happen to miss one or your phone took a very grainy picture, you will have access to the slide deck. Yes?
How do outside scholarships affect merit aid?
Great question. So the question is, how do outside scholarships affect merit aid? We, financial aid officers, will do everything in our power to protect those merit scholarships because your student earned them. They earn them either through their academics, their GPAs, their test scores, or their talent, if that's applicable. So we will do every single solitary thing in our power to protect the full value of those scholarships. What we would do if a student, say for example, you know, they've got a fairly robust financial aid award and they get a fairly robust outside scholarship, which great for you guys. What we would do is reduce the loan borrowing, so the loans that are available to the student. Because again, we want to preserve what you worked so hard for and keep those at whole dollar. If there was some major thing that you got, we would also make sure that the combination of the merit scholarships and the outside scholarships do not exceed tuition. So that would be the rare case that we would make any reductions. But if you've got room and board out there, then we can kind of make it so that we're not making any reductions in the merit scholarship. But again, it would be really rare for a student to get either a high volume, like 15 outside scholarships, or a really large lump sum scholarship that would have a direct impact on the merit scholarships. Because again, we want to preserve those as much as humanly possible. And I think in the almost 6 years I've been at Nazareth, there's might be 2 cases where a student received a super huge outside award, and we had to, slightly reduce the merit scholarship. But again, we try to avoid that at all costs. Sorry, yeah.
So special circumstances, do you communicate with financial aid department when you apply at the school or when you receive the confirmation that you got accepted?
I would say the best time to do that is probably right after you receive the financial aid offer letter, because that's going to be kind of like the initial out of the gate notification to you. And then from there you would have those conversations with the financial aid offices. Because like I said, with, if you've got 10 schools on the Fafsa, it's going to be up to you if you want to have 10 separate conversations, because it's going to be, sending in relatively the same information to each school, but each school also might have a slightly, different requirements or different forms to complete. But yeah, I would say, after you get that initial offer letter would be a good time to have that conversation. And one thing just reminded me too with New York State TAP. So on the FAFSA you can list up to 10 schools. And all 10 schools that your student is accepted to will get that information. As long as there's one New York State school on there, you'll be prompted to do the TAP application. The TAP application can only take one school. So it's going to grab the very first New York State school off of the FAFSA. So if your student ends up there, great. The only thing that you would need to update at a later point would be their university ID number. Because even though the social security number is like the identifier to get access to the application, that's not how they identify the student internally. They identify them by their university ID number. So at the very least, you would be adding the university ID number. At the most, you would be logging back onto the TAP application, taking out Nazareth and putting in RIT and the RIT university ID number. So the school will prompt you to that. The New York State HESC will also prompt your student to that, but you just want to make sure that the TAP application has the school that your student ends up with for enrollment in the fall. Yes? I would say, if you got all 10 of your offer letters, and then you can maybe plug and play some different ones. I believe you can also contact the federal processor for them to manually add another school on there for you, or just remove a school or two to put another couple on there to get some more offer letters out there.
They have a whole Q&A on that on the Fafsa website. Like right after you get the SAR letter, you can remove some schools.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, the studentaid.gov website is it can be overwhelming when you're on it for the very first time. It's got a lot of information. They consolidated, I think, 4 different websites into one. And, I find I have to give myself some patience and grace when I'm looking for something myself, because I'm like, when I was on this website, I could find it here, but now that it's all together, I've got to kind of say, okay, where intuitively would it be? But it really is a helpful website to navigate those questions. Yes?
Did I hear you correctly that TAP is used for other states, not just New York State?
Nope, New York State, or the TAP application is only within New York State. So if your student is looking at, say, Florida or Texas, and that's where their heart is going, and you have already planned that as a family, yes, we are going to Texas, then the TAP application would not be in play. But the FAFSA definitely. But there might be, an application at an out-of-state school for, institutional monies for out-of-state students. So that's kind of some other things to kind of be on the lookout if your students are considering out-of-state schools.
Css Profile, the whole separate website?
Yes, it's through College Board. Yep, and that one, if you're doing your FAFSA and TAP application in one sitting, I would give yourself a couple of days to recover from the FAFSA and TAP before you get into the CSS. I mean, the CSS is asking a lot of the similar questions on the FAFSA, but it's asking for much more. So there usually will have a checklist of all the documents that you would need to have nearby when you're doing the CSS. I did one a couple years ago for the first time in a long time. I had forgotten just, you know, but it prompts you, and if it doesn't like your answer, just like the FAFSA, if it doesn't like your answer, it'll say, I'm not quite sure that that's what you meant to put here. This is, you know, and there's some little edits and skip logic and things in there. So it's a lot, but it's doable. I believe so, but sometimes you can apply for a fee waiver as well.
So I was asking if there's a fee for the profile.
But if your child may be there for your
Like I said, the only school locally that requires the profile is U of R, but that should be very prominent on either the admissions or the financial aid websites if that is required for any schools that your kids are looking at. Well, certainly reach out to me with any other questions. Like I said, this is a lot of information to throw at you in a very short period of time, and you might wake up tomorrow or in a few days with some questions, and certainly reach out via email, and I'm happy to respond. And I greatly appreciate you guys coming out and having me back out here this year.
All right, just hold tight for 1 second. I know you guys are antsy to get out of here, but just a couple of things before you leave. So one thing we want to draw your attention to is that she mentioned to use personal emails. We stress this with your students, not just with financial aid, but with their actual college application. So when they're creating that Common App, they need to use a personal account for the reason she said. The school email will shut down once they graduate, but also even this current year, their school emails cannot receive out-of-network communications. They are only getting in-network from teachers, staff. So we've seen that a few times when they've tried to be, sometimes even when a teacher or a parent, you as a parent copies your student in with their school email, they're not gonna see it, it's not gonna kick to them. So personal emails, please monitor those, make sure they've changed them to professional. You'd be shocked at what some students' emails they think works for the college applications. Remember, it's a reflection of you now as a professional going into the adult world. So cleaning up those emails is really important, and using them for the financial aid, college applications, anything that's not related to school. The scholarships, we get that question all the time, where do I go, where do I look? She mentioned some great websites. Our College and Career Center every month puts out a newsletter called The Chronicle. It is on the school website, it is in the Schoology page, in the College and Career Center folder. I believe they post it in the English classrooms. It has all of the local scholarships that we are aware of that get sent to us. It's got the website she mentioned that you can access. Everything's kind of in one place, news and updates in general from the College and Career Center, what's coming. So that is our like go-to place when students or parents are asking, where can I find this? So again, that's updated monthly. A lot of those local scholarships really start coming out more as we get into that spring semester. Again, monitor the deadlines. It's extra work, but it's worth it. It's free money for those scholarships. So takes a little time, but usually you can recycle the college essay, letters of recommendation, and same process for transcripts for scholarships. They fill out the same form as they're going to for the colleges. They're just indicating at the top where it needs to be sent. And let me just double check my notes. I think that is it. Anything else from my colleagues? Okay, so that is it. Before you leave, first of all, thank you again, Renee. We appreciate it. Now you guys understand why we bring in the experts. It's too much for us. So thank you again, and please get out your cameras, your phones, and use our QR code, or it's right on that feedback form in front of you. It's a very brief feedback survey. Please be honest. We want to make sure we're providing really meaningful experiences for you as families, because we do this one every year. So thank you again. Enjoy your nights, and reach out if you have questions.